A semaphore telegraph, optical telegraph, shuttered telegraph chain, Chappe telegraph, or Napoleonic semaphore is a system of conveying information by means of visual signals, using towers with pivoting shutters, also known as blades or paddles. Information is encoded by the position of the mechanical elements. It is read when the shutter is in a fixed position. The system was invented in 1792 in France by Claude Chappe, and was popular in the late 18th to early 19th century. They were much faster than post riders for bringing a message over long distances, and also cheaper in their long-term operating costs. Once constructed, semaphore lines were a precursor of the electrical telegraph, which would replace them half a century later. The electrical telegraph would in turn be cheaper, faster, and more private. The distance that an optical telegraph can bridge is limited by geography and weather, thus, in practical use, most optical telegraphs use lines of relay stations to bridge longer distances. This also prevented the optical telegraph from crossing long expanses of water, unless a convenient island could be used for a relay station. Modern derivatives of the semaphore system include flag semaphore and the heliograph. Etymology. The word semaphore was coined in 1801 by the French inventor of the semaphore line itself, Claude Chappe. He composed it from the Greek elements sigma mu alpha and phi omega rho micron sigma. Chappe also coined the word telegraph. The word semaphoric was first printed in English in 1808. The newly constructed semaphoric telegraphs, referring to the destruction of telegraphs in France. The word semaphore was first printed in English in 1816. The improved semaphore has been erected on the top of the Admiralty, referring to the installation of a simpler telegraph invented by Sir Home Popham. History. Early designs. Optical telegraphy dates from ancient times, in the form of hydraulic telegraphs, torches and smoke signals. Modern design of semaphores was first foreseen by the British polymath Robert Hooke, who gave a vivid and comprehensive outline of visual telegraphy to the Royal Society in an 1684 submission in which he outlined many practical details. The system was never put into practice. One of the first experiments of optical signalling was carried out by the Anglo-Irish landowner and inventor, Sir Richard Lovell Edgeworth, in 1767. He placed a bet with his friend, the horse-racing gambler Lord Marsh, that he could transmit knowledge of the outcome of the race in just 1 hour. Using a network of signalling sections erected on the high ground, the signal would be observed from one station to the next by means of a telescope. The signal itself consisted of a large point that could be placed into 8 possible positions in 45-degree increments. A series of 2 such signals gave a total 64 code elements, and a third signal took it up to 512. He only returned to his idea in 1795, after hearing of Chappe's system. Chappe's system credit for the first successful optical telegraph goes to the French engineer Claude Chappe and his brothers in 1792, who succeeded in covering France with a network of 556 stations stretching a total distance of 4,800 kilometers. Le système Chappe was used for military and national communications until the 1850s. During 1790 to 1795, at the height of the French Revolution, France needed a swift and reliable communication system to thwart the war efforts of its enemies. France was surrounded by the forces of Britain, the Netherlands, Prussia, Austria, and Spain. The cities of Marseille and Lyon were in revolt, and the British fleet held Toulon. The only advantage France held was the lack of cooperation between the Allied forces due to their inadequate lines of communication. In the summer of 1790, the Chappe brothers set about devising a system of communication that would allow the central government to receive intelligence and to transmit orders in the shortest possible time. On the 2nd of March 1791 at 11 a.m., they sent the message, "Si vous réussissez, vous serez bientôt couverts de gloire," between Brouillon and Pass, a distance of 16 kilometers. The first means used a combination of black and white panels, clocks, telescopes, and code books to send their message. The Chapps carried out experiments during the next 2 years, and on 2 occasions their apparatus at Place de l'Etoile, Paris, was destroyed by mobs who thought they were communicating with royalist forces. However, in the summer of 1792 Claude was appointed ingénieur télégraphiste and charged with establishing a line of stations between Paris and Lille, a distance of 230 kilometers. It was used to carry dispatches for the war between France and Austria. In 1794, it brought news of a French capture of Condé-sur-le-Risco from the Austrians less than an hour after it occurred. The first symbol of a message to Lille would pass through 15 stations in only 9 minutes. The speed of the line varied with the weather, but the line to Lille typically transferred 36 symbols, a complete message, in about 32 minutes. Another line of 50 stations was completed in 1798, covering 488 kilometers between Paris and Strasbourg. The Chappe brothers determined by experiment that it was easier to see the angle of a rod than to see the presence or absence of a panel. Their semaphore was composed of black movable wooden arms, the position of which indicated alphabetic letters. With counterweights on the arms, the Chappe system was controlled by only 2 handles and was mechanically simple and reasonably robust. Each of the 2 2-meter-long arms showed 7 positions, and the 4.6-metre long crossbar connecting the 2 arms had 4 different angles, for a total of 196 symbols. Night operation with lamps on the arms was unsuccessful. To speed up transmission and to provide some semblance of security, a code book was developed for use with semaphore lines. The Chappes Corporation used a code that took 92 of the basic symbols 2 at a time to yield 8,464 coded words and phrases. From 1803 on, the French also used the 3-armed optical and semaphore at coastal locations to provide warning of British incursions. Many national services adopted signalling systems different from the Chappe system. For example, the UK and Sweden adopted systems of shuttered panels. In Spain, the engineer Agustín de Betancourt developed his own system which was adopted by that state. This system was considered by many experts in Europe better than Chappe's, even in France. Use in various countries. France after Chappe's initial line, the Paris to Strasbourg with 50 stations followed soon after. By 1824, the Chappe brothers were promoting the semaphore lines for commercial use, especially to transmit the cost of commodities. Napoleon Bonaparte saw the military advantage in being able to transmit information between locations, and carried a portable semaphore with his headquarters. This allowed him to coordinate forces and logistics over longer distances than any other army of his time. However, because stations had to be within sight of each other, and because the efficient operation of the network required well-trained and disciplined operators, the costs of administration and wages were a continuous source of financial difficulties. Only when the system was funded by the proceeds of its own lottery did costs come under control. In 1821, Norwich Duff, a young British naval officer, visiting Clermont en Argonne, walked up to the telegraph station there and engaged the signalman in conversation. Here is his note of the man's information. The pay is 25 sous per day and he, the signalman, is obliged to be there from daylight till dark. At present from 3:30 till 8:30, there are only 2 of them and for every minute a signal is left without being answered they pay 5 sous. This is a part of the branch which communicates with Strasbourg and a message arrives there from Paris in 6 minutes. It is here in 4. Sweden at the same time as Chappe. The Swedish inventor Abraham Niklas Edelkrantz experimented with the optical telegraph in Sweden. In 1794 he inaugurated his telegraph with a poem dedicated to the Swedish king on his birthday. The message went from the palace in Stockholm to the king at Drottningholm. Edelkrantz eventually developed his own system, which was quite different from its French counterpart and nearly twice as fast. The system was based on 10 collapsible iron shutters. The various positions of the shutters formed combinations of numbers which were translated into letters, words or phrases via code books. The telegraph network consisted of telegraph stations positioned at about 10 kilometers from one another. Soon telegraph circuits linking castles and fortresses in the neighborhood of Stockholm were set up, and the system was extended to Grishlim in Åland. Subsequently, telegraph circuits were introduced between Gothenburg and Marstrand, at Helsingborg, and between Karlskrona and its fortresses. Sweden was the second country in the world, after France, to introduce an optical telegraph network. The Swedish optical telegraph network was restricted to the archipelagos of Stockholm, Gothenburg and Karlskrona. Like its French counterpart, it was mainly used for military purposes. United Kingdom in Ireland, Richard Lovell Edgeworth returned to his earlier work in 1794, and proposed a telegraph there to warn against an anticipated French invasion. However, the proposal was not implemented. Lord George Murray, stimulated by reports of the Chappe Semaphore, proposed a system of visual telegraphy to the British Admiralty in 1795. He employed rectangular framework towers with 5 feet high octagonal shutters on horizontal axes that flipped between horizontal and vertical positions to signal the Rev. Mr. Gamble also proposed 2 distinct 5-element systems in 1795, one using 5 shutters, and one using 5 10-foot poles. The British Admiralty accepted Murray's system in September 1795, and the first system was the 15-site chain from London to Deal. Messages passed from London to Deal in about 60 seconds, and 65 sites were in use by 1808. Chains of Murray's shutter telegraph stations were built along the following routes: London, Deal and Sheerness, London, Great Yarmouth and London, Portsmouth and Plymouth. The shutter stations were temporary wooden huts, and at the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars they were no longer necessary, and were closed down by the Admiralty in March 1816. A replacement system was sought, and of the many ideas and devices put forward, the Admiralty chose the simpler semaphore system invented by Sir Home Popham. A Popham semaphore was a single fixed vertical 30-foot pole, with 2 movable 8-foot arms attached to the pole by horizontal pivots at their ends. One arm at the top of the pole, and the other arm at the middle of the pole. The signals of the Popham semaphore were found to be much more visible than those of the Murray semaphore. Popham's 2-arm semaphore was modelled after the 3-armed Apillan French semaphore. An experimental semaphore line between the Admiralty and Chatham was installed in July 1816, and its success helped to confirm the choice. Subsequently, the Admiralty decided to establish a permanent link to Portsmouth and built a chain of semaphore stations. Work started in December 1820 and the line was operational from 1822 until 1847, when the railway and electric telegraph provided a better means of communication. The semaphore line did not use the same locations as the shutter chain, but followed almost the same route with 15 stations: Admiralty, Chelsea Royal Hospital, Putney Heath, Combe Warren, Cooper's Hill, Chatley Heath, Pewley Hill, Bannacle Hill, Haste Hill, Holder Hill, Beacon Hill, Compton Down, Camp Down, Lumps Fort, and Portsmouth Dockyard. The semaphore tower at Chatley Heath, which replaced the Netley Heath station of the shutter telegraph, has been restored by Surrey County Council and is open to the public. The Board of Port of Liverpool obtained a private Act of Parliament to construct a chain of Popham optical semaphore stations from Liverpool, Holyhead. In 1825, a semaphore-based successor for the London to Plymouth shutter telegraph chain, branching much closer to London, at Chatley Heath in Surrey, was started but abandoned before completion. Many of the prominences on which the towers were built are known as Telegraph Hill to this day. As in France, the network required lavish amounts of money and manpower to operate and could only be justified as a defense need. Other countries, once it had proved its success, the optical telegraph was imitated in many other countries, especially after it was used by Napoleon to coordinate his empire and army. In most of these countries, the postal authorities operated the semaphore lines. In Portugal, the British forces fighting Napoleon in Portugal soon found that the Portuguese army had already a very capable semaphore terrestrial system working since 1806, giving the Duke of Wellington a decisive advantage in intelligence. The innovative Portuguese telegraphs, designed by Francisco Sierra, a mathematician, were of three types: 3 shutters, 3 balls and 1 pointer, movable arm, and with the advantage of all having only 6 significant positions. He also wrote the code book, Tabors Telegraphicas, with 1554 entries from 1 to 6666, the same for the 3 systems. Since early 1810, the network was operated by Corpo Telegráfico, the first Portuguese military signal corps. In Canada, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, established the first semaphore line in North America. In operation by 1800, it ran between the city of Halifax and the town of Annapolis in Nova Scotia, and across the Bay of Fundy to St. John and Fredericton in New Brunswick. In addition to providing information on approaching ships, the Duke used the system to relay military commands, especially as they related to troop discipline. The Duke had envisioned the line reaching as far as the British garrison at Quebec City. However, the many hills and coastal fog meant the towers needed to be placed relatively close together to ensure visibility. The required labor to build and continually man so many stations taxed the already stretched-thin British military, and there is doubt the New Brunswick line was ever in operation. With the exception of the towers around Halifax Harbour, the system was abandoned shortly after the Duke's departure in August 1800. In 1801, the Danish Post Office installed a semaphore line across the Great Belt Strait, paddles.Information, between islands Funen and Zealand, with stations at Nyborg on Funen, on the small island Sprago in the middle of the strait, and at Korsør on Zealand. It was in use until 1865. The Kingdom of Prussia began with a line 750 kilometers long between Berlin and Koblenz in 1833, and in Russia, Tsar Nicholas I inaugurated a line between Moscow and Warsaw of 1,200 kilometers length in 1833. It needed 220 stations manned by 1,320 operators. In the United States, the first optical telegraph was built by Jonathan Grout. It was a 104 kilometers line connecting Martha's Vineyard with Boston, and its purpose was to transmit news about shipping. One of the principal hills in San Francisco, California, is also named Telegraph Hill, after the semaphore telegraph which was established there in 1849 to signal the arrival of ships into San Francisco Bay. The semaphores were successful enough that Samuel Morse failed to sell the electrical telegraph to the French government. However, France finally committed to replace semaphores with electric telegraphs in 1846. Electric telegraphs are both more private, and almost completely unaffected by weather. They also work at night. Many contemporaries predicted the failure of electric telegraphs because they are so easy to cut. The last stationary semaphore link in regular service was in Sweden, connecting an island with a mainland telegraph line. It went out of service in 1880.